Okay, are you ready for a story that flips everything you thought you knew about celebrity marriages? Because once you see what's really going on with Judge Faith Jenkins and Kenny Lattimore, there's no turning back. This is the kind of scandal that makes you question whether anything is ever as perfect as it seems. Picture this: a sharp, no-nonsense TV judge who built an empire telling everyone not to settle, linked up with an R&B crooner known for smooth ballads and an even smoother image. On paper, it looked flawless. Two successful people coming together to form an unstoppable power couple. But behind the scenes, an empire of deception was taking shape, fueled by money, power, and influence, and it was only a matter of time before the cracks began to show. From the very first time people heard about Judge Faith's latest news, there was a spark in the air. Everyone wanted to believe in this love story. They wanted to see a strong, brilliant woman find her happily ever after. They wanted to see an R&B legend finally move on from the questions and chaos of his past. Yet here we are, sorting through Judge Faith's scandal update, facing the reality that all the fairy tale vibes might have been a carefully staged performance. You might have seen their wedding photos, their big smiles, and their coordinated outfits. But what you haven't seen is how this entire relationship seems designed to rewrite the narrative for both of them. We're talking about a multi-layered plan that involved rebranding, reputation repair, and a chase for influence. And now, with so many red flags popping up, it's time to pull back the curtain on what really happened. Before we dive in, I want to say one quick thing. If you're enjoying this breakdown so far, make sure you subscribe right now so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the world of fame, fortune, and the price people pay to keep it all. All right, let's keep going, because we've got a lot to cover. Let's start with Judge Faith Jenkins herself. She isn't just any TV personality. She has a background in law that gave her the edge to stand out among other reality courtroom figures. She's smart, articulate, and she always looked like she had everything under control. But behind her polished television persona, she was facing one of the biggest questions many women deal with. Will I ever get married? She was over 40, single, and facing that ticking clock. She would walk into courtrooms with unstoppable confidence. Yet sometimes, all the confidence in the world can't keep those intrusive thoughts away when family members start asking, "When are you finally tying the knot?" That kind of pressure can push even the most self-assured person into a corner. And that's where things get interesting. Judge Faith always told women not to settle, but when you start feeling those invisible deadlines creeping up, you might do what you once told everyone else not to do. You might find yourself lowering the bar, or at least ignoring certain warning signs, just to make sure you don't end up alone. Suddenly, the strong, go-getter judge found herself in a position where she was ready, maybe too ready, to meet the right person. And that's when Kenny Lattimore entered the picture. Kenny Lattimore, the R&B singer who made grown folks swoon for years, had his own set of burdens. He had a past marriage to Shantae Moore that dissolved in a flurry of rumors, custody battles, and unspoken tensions that never really went away. Every so often, people would raise an eyebrow about his personal life. They'd question how squeaky clean he really was. He tried to maintain that respectable image, but it felt like there was always something lurking just beneath the surface, whether it was speculation about his private habits or lingering drama tied to his divorce. He needed to turn the page on that chapter of his life. He needed someone who radiated respect, someone who could help him create a narrative that made him look stable, grounded, and ready for a new beginning. So, you've got Judge Faith, a top-tier legal mind and commanding TV presence who's feeling the heat of time slipping by. You've got Kenny, an R&B star trying to erase the shadow of his past. Together, they formed what looked like a storybook romance. After a whirlwind connection, they announced a relationship that seemed almost too perfect. They positioned themselves as these deeply moral figures, all about righteousness, harmony, and standing for higher principles. They talked openly about their decision to abstain from certain things until marriage. They made social media posts that made them look like they'd stepped straight out of a motivational poster about love and faith. But the real question is, did they actually love each other that much, or did they love what being together did for their images? Because from the outside looking in, every move felt calculated. They had a board of mentors for their relationship. They stuck to a script that was part romance novel, part strategic PR plan. Their wedding, which took place in early 2020, played out like the grand finale of a Hollywood rom-com. Stevie Wonder was there, Devin Franklin officiated, and the whole event oozed sophistication. It was the ultimate statement of "look at us, we're a power couple with unstoppable influence." Yet the empire started to wobble faster than anyone expected. A year into that marriage, Judge Faith launched a full-on relationship advice book titled "Sis Don't Settle." That felt like an eyebrow raiser to anyone paying attention. She had only been married for a hot minute, and already she was positioning herself as the new guru of love. It screamed marketing more than mastery. Then, we noticed she was suddenly off the show Divorce Court with zero fanfare. One minute she's the face of televised marital spats. The next minute Star Jones is in her seat. No big farewell, no major announcement, just gone. And that kind of silent exit rarely indicates everything's peachy behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Kenny was back in the music studio, channeling his new love into songs that felt eerily similar to how he once talked about his ex-wife. You start to see the pattern, the same lines, the same sentimental narratives, just with a new muse's name attached. It was as though they were recycling the formula they'd used in the past, but this time with a different co-star. At this point, the illusions of purity and authenticity began fading. If it had truly been a straightforward love story, people wouldn't have so many questions. But it wasn't just a love story, was it? It was a campaign, a purposeful construction of two personal brands merging into one. Judge Faith needed to show she wasn't just an unmarried judge telling people how to run their relationships. Kenny needed to show he'd moved on from the cloud of gossip that once followed him. Their union became a kind of marketing firm for each other's images, complete with strategic tie-ins, faith-based catchphrases, and enough romantic poses to fill an entire lifestyle magazine. And let's talk about the big pivot point, the baby announcement. In 2022, they told the world they were expecting. Judge Faith was 44 and Kenny was 52. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but the timing made everyone take a second look. It came right after she exited divorce court, right after her book was met with more skepticism than praise, and right when people were starting to question if their brand was losing its shine. If you're building a public image that's turning shaky, a pregnancy can sometimes look like a new storyline to keep the spotlight going. And that's exactly what people began whispering. Was this baby a genuine next step in their love? Or was it a well-timed pivot to keep them in the news cycle and maintain that sense of empire they'd worked so hard to create? We have to remember that money, power, and influence often drive these celebrity narratives more than genuine emotion. When you're a television judge or an R&B singer, your brand is everything. Your brand is what pays the bills, keeps your name in conversations, and opens the door to bigger deals. Judge Faith's scandal update, at its core, is about how that brand started to get shaky. She lost a platform she once commanded and replaced it with a personal project that felt premature. Kenny was still leaning on the same old lines of devotion that he's used before. If we follow the money, we see two individuals who are each worth about $2 million. Not exactly the mega-million empire some fans might imagine, but enough to suggest they each had a vested interest in keeping their images sparkling. The result is an empire of deception that looks unstoppable from the outside. They had the church crowd's support, they had mainstream fans from the R&B community, they had reality TV watchers who recognized Faith's face, and they had the social media audience that loves a good wedding story. They curated their entire love story on a public platform, presumably to lock down every angle of interest. But the moment we see behind the curtain, the moment we realize each piece was meticulously arranged, we start to realize it might not be built on the strong foundation they led us to believe. It's no wonder people became fascinated by the question of whether Judge Faith truly fell in love with Kenny, or whether she saw an opportunity to finally settle, without calling it settling. Because on paper, he checked so many of those boxes. She literally wrote a list of 50 must-have traits for a partner, and he ticked off 49. The one box he missed was height. She wanted 6 feet, and he's 5 feet 10 inches. But when your biological clock is louder than your sense of caution, you tend to let those 2 inches slide. This was a perfect example of the illusions we create when we're desperate to check the final box in life. And then there's the relationship board of directors concept. It sounds creative, even sweet, but at its heart, it emphasizes how methodical they were in sculpting this union. When you're scheduling sessions with married friends and religious mentors like you're building a startup, it's less about organic growth and more about crisis management. Because real love doesn't typically need a panel of advisors to keep it afloat. It thrives on genuine understanding, mutual respect, and authenticity. The moment your bond becomes a group project, you might already be acknowledging that it can't stand on its own. The downfall of their mentors, Devin Franklin and Megan Good, was another jarring blow. Devin and Megan had written The Wait, championing the idea of postponing intimacy until marriage, and that was the blueprint for Judge Faith and Kenny. Then that marriage fell apart too. It left Faith and Kenny in a precarious place, clinging to a plan that suddenly looked like it couldn't survive reality. Their entire method for sustaining love was called into question. And once the public sees the pillars of your relationship toppling, they start to wonder if everything else is about to collapse as well. Speaking of collapse, we have to talk about the abrupt end of Judge Faith's role on divorce court. One day she's in front of cameras, guiding couples through their problems. The next, she's replaced with hardly a goodbye. It's a move that screams power shift. If Judge Faith had maintained the unstoppable credibility she once had, would the producers have made that decision so quietly? Or does it suggest they didn't find her as bankable once the cracks in her own marriage narrative became visible? After all, a judge teaching relationship lessons, who's also in a questionable relationship, can tarnish a show's perceived authority. That means money, power, and influence were all on the line for the network too. Then we arrive at the real turning point, the moment we realize just how deep this empire of deception might go. Their net worth, combined, hovers around $4 million. That's a comfortable sum, but not the massive fortune some celebrities enjoy. They have enough to live well, but the hustle for the next big check remains real. And in the entertainment world, that hustle often involves an ongoing narrative that keeps fans engaged. A stable, conflict-free marriage might not be as profitable as one that's always on the edge of scandal or big announcements. We see it time and time again. A well-placed scandal can drive headlines, interviews, and book deals. If your brand starts fading, you need a new story to keep the money rolling in. So, how does Judge Faith Jenkins's marriage to Kenny Lattimore stand up now that we're looking at it under a brighter light? From the outside, they're still presenting that united front, at least in occasional glimpses. But is that front truly standing on solid ground, or is it just a facade? The more we examine their timeline, the more it feels like an orchestrated series of events designed to keep them in the public eye. Big wedding, big announcements, big baby news, big book release. And under it all, a persistent question. What's the real foundation holding these two together? It certainly doesn't help that each time they face a major challenge, they pivot toward a new angle that keeps them relevant. Judge Faith lost her divorce court seat? No worries, there's a baby announcement. The relationship advice book came out too soon? Well, let's lean into heartfelt Instagram posts to overshadow the critics. Their entire cycle suggests a careful strategy. Whenever the heat gets too high or the narrative starts to sound suspicious, pivot to the next big storyline. That's how you keep an empire running, even when it's built on shaky ground. At the root of it all, we have to remember that power and influence go hand in hand with appearances. Judge Faith was a symbol of no-nonsense authority. Kenny Lattimore was a symbol of timeless romance. Put them together, and you have a pairing that seems unstoppable until you start seeing the loose threads. Once you notice those threads, the entire tapestry starts to unravel. That's what we're witnessing now. The unraveling of a carefully stitched story about two individuals who might need each other for reasons that have more to do with preserving their images than nurturing genuine love. Does that mean they don't care for each other at all? Not necessarily. They could very well have deep feelings for one another. But when you base so much of your relationship on brand building and public perception, it's hard to separate what's real from what's marketing. If the entire love story started as a strategic partnership, that foundation might struggle to hold up under real-life pressures like job losses, aging, insecurities, and unresolved secrets. And those unresolved secrets, especially on Kenny's side, keep hovering over their union. The refusal of Shantae Moore to openly deny or confirm certain rumors created a permanent cloud around him. He's done his best to outrun that past, but the questions linger. Judge Faith, in her quest for a stable man, might have decided to overlook them, focusing instead on how he checked most of her boxes and complemented her public persona. But a relationship built on ignoring the elephant in the room is a relationship at risk of collapse the moment that elephant rears its trunk again. There's also an element of moral high ground they tried to sell, talking about waiting, about doing things the right way, that can come back to bite you when you fall short of the lofty image you presented. People tend to scrutinize those who set themselves up as moral examples. The more you preach about your purity or perfect approach, the more the public will dig when they see inconsistencies. It's the nature of building your brand on a pedestal. Eventually, someone tries to knock you off. Now, let's dive into the subtle ways they kept the show going. You might have seen them post about how they prayed together, or how they believed in a higher purpose for their marriage. On the surface, that sounds beautiful. But the deeper question is whether that was genuine faith or a marketing strategy to capture the Christian and spiritual audiences. After all, religion is a powerful influencer in many communities. Presenting yourselves as the epitome of faith and virtue can win over hearts and wallets. In some ways, it becomes an easy route to establishing trust and admiration among fans. Once you have that, you can sell anything from books to albums to speaking engagements. Speaking engagements could be a huge source of income for them, especially if they're packaged as the perfect Christian couple who overcame adversity and found love in their 40s. Imagine the conferences, retreats, or workshops they could headline. Each appearance would reinforce their brand. But the moment the public sees inconsistencies, like a rushed relationship advice book or a sudden career transition, that trust starts to erode. That's when the empire begins losing value. The illusions of money, power, and influence rely on unwavering belief from the audience. Once the audience doubts, the empire cracks. The real heartbreak here might be that Judge Faith's initial message to women was "don't settle," implying that authenticity and standards matter more than the ticking clock. Then she turned around and orchestrated a relationship that appears as though it could be settling. Kenny might have found a wife who polishes his brand, but if there was any hesitation or suspicion on her part, that can fester into resentment. After all, you can't build a deeply satisfying relationship on the pressure to appear perfect. Sooner or later, the facade shows. And that's what makes this storyline so compelling. Two powerful figures, each with a vested interest in controlling the narrative. Each using the other to fill a space in their personal journeys that was lacking. Each trying to maintain an image of success and wholesomeness, while behind the scenes, the empire might be rotting. One day, you're standing on top of a castle you built on public admiration. The next day, you find the foundation was never as strong as you pretended it was. To top it all off, the baby arrived in a swirl of speculation. Did it bring them closer, or did it serve as the ultimate brand refresh? Babies can signal new beginnings, but they can also be used as band-aids for bigger issues. And fans aren't naive. They can sense when it's a heartfelt next step versus a frantic pivot to distract from failing plans. If a baby's arrival was part of a quick solution to keep them afloat in the public eye, that might only work temporarily. Real life catches up eventually. Now that the dust has settled a bit, we see Judge Faith on a new show, behind the scenes producing Killer Relationship, exploring stories of love gone wrong. Ironically, it's almost an unintentional reflection of her own situation if it keeps unraveling. Meanwhile, Kenny continues his slow but steady presence in the music world, ever the soulful singer who says all the right things. Their net worth might hold steady, or it might dwindle if the public grows tired of the staged narrative. Because once people see through the curtain, they often move on to the next big scandal. The money, power, and influence that once seemed guaranteed can slip away, leaving behind only the remains of a carefully built facade. So where does that leave us today? It leaves us with a lot of questions about whether Judge Faith Jenkins and Kenny Lattimore are truly living in unity or merely coexisting in a story they created. It leaves us wondering how they handle the quiet moments when the cameras aren't rolling and nobody's around to admire the brand. Does Judge Faith question those 50 traits she listed? Does Kenny reflect on whether he's done enough to confront the rumors from his past? Do they both regret building a high-profile marriage that had to withstand so much scrutiny? We may never get the full truth because the empire they built thrives on half-truths and curated images. The moment they strip it all away and lay everything bare, the brand might lose its luster. Yet the more they cling to a false image, the more they risk a public crash if the real story finally surfaces. That's the classic tension of a celebrity empire of deception. Do you keep the act going at any cost, or do you risk losing your empire by owning up to your truths? At the end of the day, we can't ignore the fact that they've captured widespread attention. Their story resonates because it speaks to universal fears: aging, loneliness, career highs and lows, unfulfilled desires, and the need to maintain an outward appearance of success. Most people can relate to the fear of not meeting certain life milestones. But few of us would go as far as constructing a relationship that seems more performance than genuine bond. That's where the drama lies. That's why we're all watching to see what happens next. So if you find yourself drawn to this saga, you're not alone. It's a masterclass in how money, power, and influence can shape a relationship from the very start. One that looked like a fairy tale, but has all the hallmarks of a carefully orchestrated illusion. One that might give birth to a real family while still feeling superficial at its core. And that's the big question we're left with. Can a relationship that started under these conditions evolve into something real, or will it forever be haunted by the ghosts of its own creation? Now I want to hear from you. Where do you stand on Judge Faith Jenkins and her scandal update? Are you convinced there was genuine love here, or do you see it as a strategic merger built on mutual needs? Do you think this empire of deception can hold steady, or is it only a matter of time before it collapses under its own weight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you spotted the red flags from day one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button because we have plenty more deep dives into the world of celebrity power plays on the way. Until next time, remember that when love meets marketing, there's always a risk of the truth getting sold out in the process. And if we've learned anything from Judge Faith's latest news, it's that once the cracks appear, the entire story can come tumbling down in an instant. That's the real takeaway. You can hide a lot behind a picture-perfect facade, but eventually, every empire of deception faces the moment when the curtains draw back and the audience sees what's really going on. The question now is whether they'll manage to keep the illusions alive, or if we'll be watching the final act of a love story that was never quite what it seemed in the first place.